Today, we're going to talk about profit-based inflation. One of the reasons that inflation may continue to be stubborn is people who make products or sell services are reluctant to sell or to accept less. When I think about the current market with respect to sellers expecting to get more than what the market is willing to pay for their house, I couldn't help but think that there's probably something there in helping to understand current motivation.
You hit it really well. There are two different types of sellers. If you're a seller that bought a home in the last 3 years, you're unlikely to have a ton of equity.
Right.
In fact, the only equity you may have had is if you paid a little more or a lot more for the home than you should have. Maybe $100 grand. There were stories of people paying $200 grand more with cash.
Right.
So that could be considered equity. They don't have the luxury of someone who's lived here for 20 years.
Right.
Somebody's lived here for 20 years, what if they owe nothing on the asset?
Mm-hmm.
And they're stubborn about their price. I'm not going to sell my house. I'm only going to sell for this price.
You're not going to be able to spend that equity unless you sell the house.
Unless you sell the house.
I think the idea of holding out for more, you may have missed that opportunity.
You could see where somebody would think, oh, I'm going to hold out for more because what if we'll get another wave of people coming?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that wave crested at about 75,000 people during COVID. The years before, we were in the 40, 50 range. I think 50 was probably the highest. Somebody said it, I think Mark Sprague again said it, 43 or so thousand this year net.
Mm-hmm.
So we're back to where we used to be. I wonder if that's going to slow a seller down from really being too stubborn about their profit when they really should focus on the goal and move on.
I've been in this house for 20 years. I want to realize those capital gains. I mean, that's one thing, but if you have to move because of a job change or some type of change of life, and you've got a deadline where you have to be there by a certain day, then all of a sudden your motivation can change.
So what if you have someone who, despite all that great information, their motivation doesn't change and they still believe, no, I'm going to net this price. There are two types of homes in the market, those that sell and those that help others sell.
Help others sell.
They could help a neighbor sell without realizing it and then wonder, where did my buyer go? Don't you feel like in the first 30 days, that's probably your most probable time of selling because the consumers are seeing it fresh?
I think part of that's driven by misconceptions. What I mean by that is statistics that you just stated, that half the number of people are moving to the Austin Metro, the 75 versus the 40.
Right.
If I base my decisions on something like that, I may miss that there are still 40,000 people moving here. There are still 40,000 people that are buying a house. And if my house is priced correctly and it's nicer, more well maintained than someone else's, I got a higher likelihood of selling mine and accomplishing my goals, as opposed to holding out for prices that I think I should get or what I perceive my neighbor got several years ago and still being in the house.
As you were saying that, it prompted me to think there may be that unusual property that's just an amazing location, has the best view, what have you, and they can stick to their guns and stick to their price, and we'll see if that actually helps prices stay somewhat level. If you have stubborn sellers and buyers in Texas, since Texas is a non-disclosure state, buyers really don't know what sellers paid for their home for the most part.
No.
There's no information. You could guess, but no one's going to find that information out by looking up in a public database.
Yeah, you can get kind of an idea if you see like a mortgage posted or whatever the appraised value is.
If somebody's been in a house for 20-something years, what if they paid off and have no mortgage?
Yeah. Another thing I think that we all need to realize is that when we saw, now of course Austin not so much, but let's say nationally, the huge price decreases after the 2008 housing bubble burst.
Yes.
One of the major drivers of that was what I will call forced sales. If someone is in foreclosure, that bank is forced to sell that house for what they could get, which is why in some areas where you had more foreclosures, you saw more rapid decline in the median price.
Agreed.
In today's market, what we have is the opposite of that. Most sellers have refinanced over the last several years and probably have locked in a 2 or 3% interest rate on their current mortgage.
Right.
And if they can't get what they think their house is worth, that provides an additional disincentive to sell that house because they're going to be giving up that low interest rate.
They may be inclined to just rent out the property. Because
Exactly.
rental rates are not too bad. So that may actually continue to keep the prices a little higher, because with that lack of inventory.
Which is what so many talk about on the national level, is you don't have the number that you should to choose from.
We still don't.
Which keeps that
We still
competition.
don't. Thankfully, the builders are building, but they're not able to keep up.
In any case, I think it's safe to say that not only Austin, but pretty much that whole, what I'll call the Golden Triangle, Houston to San Antonio through Austin up to Dallas, we have seen such an influx of new residents with more disposable income, whether it be the jobs they have or the equity that they brought from their sales in other states.
That's right.
They have had an impact on the housing values that is going to be there. I mean, you're never going to escape it. I mean, the impact has happened. Now, even though we might see adjustments, and I think certain areas, again, coming back to demand, there probably are going to be certain areas of this metro that's not going to be in as high demand as others, which could create lower prices in comparable type houses.
There's an exact example for this, that as you mentioned that, and it's related to condos. So 78701, there's a 7-month supply of condos right now for sale. In 78704, there's a 5-month supply. In 78749, there's a 4-month supply of homes. There's still sales happening, but a 7-month supply is significant in 78701, the downtown area. You have to really look at each pocket, really look at what if you have an area in the suburbs where you have a significant number of folks that have lived there for over 20 years. Stubborn about their pricing, and they may have the ability to do it because their supply is lower. So when those houses come on the market, buyers may think, well, I can get a deal.
There has been, I mean, for a long time now, a standoff.
Yes.
The buyers are holding out for some kind of crazy deal, whereas the sellers are pretty stubborn in wanting to get what they think it's worth. Coming back to that condo, because I don't think I've ever heard that before, in the downtowns, does that include all price ranges?
The top listing price was like 4.9. That unit sold for 4.7 in the last 30 days. So that was the top sale in 01.
Okay.
In 78704, the top condo sale was 850. So that's the difference. As you mentioned earlier, you're getting closer to downtown. People are paying more of a premium for that. The one thing that could change a seller's mind is there's still about 20% of sales happening that are cash sales. So what if a seller thinks, well, man, I can get cash and not have to worry about appraisal, not have to worry about...
Cash can certainly close quicker, and you don't have that additional delay. Of course, if the dollars are out, right, that becomes a more attractive offer.
I think you hit it on the head. I think there are certain areas in our city, certain really micro, think of micro real estate cocoon, so to speak, where sellers have a lot of equity and they're not budging, and there's low supply, and that I could see where that could keep the price more consistent than a buyer would think.
They're actually helping everyone else in the neighborhood because those prices are staying.
I think that's a fair statement. That's right.
Overall, nationally, every year, what is it, about 6-ish% of the houses sell? So think about that. Is that of all the houses out there, only 6% of them are pretty much determining the value of all the rest of them.
Wow.
So if that small percentage, like we saw a couple years ago, are going at a premium, everybody else's value on paper goes up.
Goes up.
But if those houses begin to sell less than that, where you have sellers that are more motivated, that don't have the option of holding it on or just waiting it out, you're going to see transactions happening less than that.
We can't foresee things like a catastrophic event.
Right.
We couldn't have seen COVID. The year I got into real estate was 2011.
Oh, it's perfect timing,
So I got to see that. That was a 3 to 4 month effect. You could really feel it. And then the crash of 2008 was about the closest thing I've felt to what we went through COVID. So minus a catastrophic event, minus something that's worldwide. If you study the market, you hire professionals like you and I, and you watch the market consistently when you go on the market. I find myself, when I'm listing properties, we're doing a market update every week. Here are the number of, like if you educate your seller and the seller is willing to watch it, the market will tell you what's happening. You just have to pay attention.
You may put that house in the market thinking there's only 2 other houses sold, but in the next week or 2 that you've been on the market, 5 or 10 more come on, all of a sudden that whole competition thing changes.
It requires you to be a professional, to do your homework, so every week you should be looking at that market, educating that's the number one complaint sellers have when they're changing real estate agents, is the listing agent didn't communicate.
And it's your house.
And it's your house.
You deserve that.
I have a fun saying I tell my clients, I want you to call me every week and ask me, what have you done to sell my house this week?
You always have something to answer.
I always have something to.
I'm sure you do.
That's a really good pressure, by the way. Yeah, it keeps me busy.
Well, listen, thank you again for coming by, and I've learned a lot, and hopefully this would be beneficial to anyone out here watching. And until the next time.
Let's do it again.
All right.